We will hear today from men like Robert Woodson Sr., founder and president of the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization based in Washington, D.C. Since 1981, Mr. Woodson has acted as a catalyst to bring people together to attack the inner city's most pressing problems: gang violence, teen pregnancy, drug abuse, and fatherless children. One of his most remarkable successes occurred earlier this year, just blocks from the Capitol, where Mr. Woodson helped broker a truce between warring gangs that had turned the Benning Terrace neighborhood into a combat zone. It all started when Mr. Woodson was approached by another grassroots organization, the Alliance for Concerned Men, that asked for his help in ending the gang violence that had so devastated their neighborhood. This was no easy task. At the start of the negotiations, they were held in Mr. Woodson's sparsely furnished offices near DuPont Circle. Gang members so distrusted one another, they wore bulletproof vests and carried cell phones to call for reinforcements in case of an ambush. But by the end, the warring parties had laid down their guns and set off together to improve their neighborhood. Together, they now remove graffiti, clear trash-strewn streets, and plan for a better future. The peace has held now for 3.5 months, and it's allowed parents to return to the streets and children to return to the playgrounds. Mr. Woodson's latest project is Hands Across D.C., an umbrella group of 8 local grassroots organizations dedicated to fighting urban ills. Its mission is to pool ideas and resources while Mr. Woodson helps find private resources to finance their efforts. If it works, he plans to take it nationwide. The high-energy grassroots example set by Bob Woodson is not confined to Washington, D.C. The phenomenon is spreading across the country, with prominent examples in Los Angeles, Hartford, San Antonio, Dallas, and New York. What unites these groups is an emphasis on homegrown solutions to local problems. As Mr. Woodson likes to say, the people who can do the most good share the same zip code as the people who need the help. The committee should use this hearing to educate itself on some of the extraordinary efforts being made by private citizens across America to confront some of this country's most intractable social ills. It may also wish to consider the appropriate role of the federal government in supporting these remarkable individuals. It's my pleasure to inquire of Congressman John Conyers, the ranking Democrat, if he has an opening statement.
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you, Chairman Hyde, and good afternoon to our distinguished witnesses, and I welcome you all here joining Henry Hyde, chairman of this committee, whose concern about the subject matter has been very similar to mine. You should know, Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Woodson's activities, Bob Woodson, goes way back beyond 1981. He's been working in this area for quite a while. It was with him in Philadelphia with Congressman Chaka Fattah's father and mother. We were back in the, I guess it was the 70s, working on innovative projects in terms of how to rebuild a community and how to turn despair into hope. So here we are, about to begin the proceedings, and I'm glad to see Mr. Gilmore, Mr. Woodson, and Congressman Fattah. I yield back the balance of my time.
We begin our testimony with our good friend and colleague Chaka Fattah, who represents the 2nd District of Pennsylvania. He's in a unique position to tell the committee about the gang intervention and prevention work of Philadelphia's House of Umoja, which was founded by his mother, Sister Falaka Fattah. The House of Umoja is an exemplary program that's inspired the work of many grassroots efforts nationwide to promote positive youth alternatives.
Let me try to be as brief as possible. The program that is run by my family is one that has been recognized nationally by President Carter and Reagan and Clinton. It has received numerous awards. It is not unique, however. That is to say that it is essentially, at its core, people who are committed to trying to improve the life chances of young people, to intervene positively in their lives, and to help them overcome, in many instances, obstacles that would be unimaginable for members of Congress to even be able to comprehend in their day-to-day lives. I do want to state that Bob Woodson, Robert Woodson, and I want to thank him publicly for all of his help to assist neighborhood organizations like the one run by my family and others around the country to be able to think their way through some of the critical policy decisions that have to be made, especially as these organizations think about engaging in broader partnerships with the public or private sector. Many of these community-based organizations at times lack the sophistication, even though they have the sincerity, to be able to engage in these transactions that require them to grow up a lot sooner in terms of their administrative capacities and the like. So I want to thank Bob Woodson for his assistance in that regard.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We're delighted next to have with us Robert L. Woodson, Sr., President of the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, a nonprofit self-help research and demonstration organization founded 16 years ago to empower low-income Americans. Mr. Woodson's organization has played a major role in providing technical support to many of the youth intervention organizations we will hear from today, including the Alliance of Concerned Men here in Washington. David Gilmore is the court-appointed receiver for the District of Columbia Housing Authority, which has been designated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development as one of the most troubled housing authorities in the nation.
I would just like to say that often we have to understand how did the conditions get created of a bending terrace, and I think public policy played a role. It is not solely responsible, we must understand. In Washington, D.C., for instance, back in 1965, Southwest Washington and Main Avenue was a subject of urban renewal. We moved thousands of residents on Alabama Avenue while providing no support for residents who were placed in public housing on Alabama Avenue and thus concentrated. No parking facilities, no business, no infrastructure, no jobs. And so it has created a breeding ground for the kind of problems that we have today. And it's the same in the Columbia Heights area, where during the riots of Dr. King, 4,000 homes, 270 businesses, and 3,500 units of assisted housing replaced it. So we have to understand that public policy contributed to that, injured with the helping hand.
My name is David Gilmore, and as you said, I am the court-appointed receiver overseeing the recovery of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, one of the most notoriously distressed public housing agencies in the country. On the very first day that I arrived here in the District of Columbia, I was taken on a bus tour to see some of the developments for which I was now responsible. And amongst the locations that I passed was Benning Terrace. And the vehicle would not go into the circle at Benning Terrace, but passed slowly by it. And I saw what has been the case on a day-to-day basis for many, many months, perhaps even years. I don't need to describe it. I think everybody in this room is familiar with it. It is the typical, perhaps stereotypical image of a very distressed public housing community in the midst of what I should tell you is an extraordinarily viable and stable neighborhood, but in a cul-de-sac, ill-maintained, filthy, ill-equipped, not friendly at all, not a friendly area, and guarded there by some young men that looked fairly fierce to me. I said to myself and to my colleagues, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this, but the first idea that came to mind, and the idea that has persisted in my mind up until January of this year has been the only thing we can think to do is to take these buildings down. We'll demolish the buildings, we will disperse the folks that live in it, and in the process, we will have moved the violence somewhere else. Not a particularly creative approach, perhaps one that gets born mostly out of frustration, but let me tell you, a costly approach, to say the least. We estimate that it would have cost us $1 million to demolish these buildings. That says nothing about the cost of rebuilding some other facility in its place. We estimate that we would have lost approximately 100 dwelling units for low-income families to the stock in this city. And in addition to that, we would have lost thousands upon thousands of additional dollars in lost rental income. The cost to us in this instance, in the millions. I pay these young men. I am their employer, and I guess that's the reason, part of the reason why I'm here. When we began this program and we began the training effort at Benning Terrace, these young men came to work in this program for $6.50 an hour. I have dedicated about $300,000 in Housing Authority funds to keep this program alive. And so in the process, the simple calculation arithmetic would tell you that the effort that we have put forth already to date has saved this agency, which is supported by federal dollars, already in the millions of dollars. Let us not even forget that when we pay these young men $6.50 an hour at the same time, we're paying the police officers that have been dispatched to the hot spots in the city $30 an hour. The arithmetic is simple. As the chief of police has told me in the District of Columbia, because of the peace that these young men have forged in this community, he is now able to take that $30 an hour policeman and move him to another area of the city which has a greater need at this point. The arithmetic is simple. $6.50 an hour for these young fellows versus $30 an hour for a police officer. The tale goes on. We are in the position where we need to do something to beef up the fire safety equipment in this development. We haven't been able to maintain the fire alarms in the common hallways because they have been vandalized. We estimate it will take us $10,000, only $10,000, to repair the system. But we wouldn't have thought up until then to spend that $10,000. Instead, we were prepared to spend upwards of $200,000 to move the pull stations into the individual apartments where they theoretically would be safe. The young men have made it possible for us to save about $190,000 in funds because I am now confident that we can go back and pull and repair those fire stations. I want to point out in my closing moments here to tell you, members of the committee, and to my colleagues as well, that this is not an issue of dollars, in fact, though I have concentrated most of my testimony on that issue. Let me close by saying, if I may, we tend to think about these young men in the stereotypic fashion as though they were empty shells with no heart beating in them. I only wish to call everyone's attention to the fact that just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, there was a serious fire in one of the apartments at Benning Terrace, not far from the Circle, as a matter of fact, in the Circle. And one of these young men, Donnie Jackson, pulled babies out of that burning apartment. It takes courage, it takes heart, and it is that kind of thing which describes what these young men are really made of. And so when we begin to think of them as heartless, empty shells, let's remember that they are human beings. They are young people who have been looking for someone to say, I believe in you, I care about you, and I trust you. And I have the honor and the privilege at this committee to repeat to them, I care about you, I trust you, and I honor my association with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.